Hey, everyone. It is Friday afternoon here in Southern California. A little earlier than our normal time, but we are still going. It is still technically Friday afternoon. So here we go. It is Friday evening over there on the West Coast. It may be late Friday over there in Europe. It could even be Saturday wherever you are. But no matter where you are in the world, you know what time it is. It is time for Cinema Crusaders, that show where we talk about older movies that we think deserve another look, that we want to reintroduce to you, that we want to review, that we want to get into depth and detail about. We're doing something a little bit different right now. We're playing 6 Degrees, or I think it's called 6 Degrees. It might be 7 Degrees. Who cares? 6 Degrees of Cinema Crusaders, where we take a actor or actress from the previous movie that we reviewed, bring them forward, and do another movie with them. And after that, this time, it is going to be Steve Sellers' turn to pick a movie. But last time we did Elizabeth that had Joseph Fiennes in it. I think that's the right actor. I believe so. And Joseph Fiennes stars in this movie, Enemy at the Gates, along with Jude Law and Ed Harris and Bob Hoskins and Rachel Weisz and Ron Perlman and a number of others. It's an incredible movie. It is a historical drama about one sniper, Vasily Zaitsev, who was real within the Battle of Stalingrad, and the duel between two men, Major Walter Koenig and Vasily Zaitsev within the Battle of Stalingrad. And we're going to talk a little bit about historical accuracies and inaccuracies or things that can't be verified. We've talked about this with other movies that we've done, like Elizabeth, Hidalgo, but we're going to get into all that. But before we do, I want to introduce my fellow Cinema Crusaders, those gentlemen without which I could not do this show. They bring a wealth of knowledge and insight and just interesting commentary on these movies, and I value them immensely. So first, I'm going to introduce the man who is a filmmaker himself. He's also a comic book writer. He has done a number of award-winning short films. He is just incredibly talented. He has allowed me to see what he's working on next, which I can't wait to see as well. I'm talking about the man behind Warehouse 9 Pro, none other than Lance Lucero, the man who picked this film. How you doing, Lance?
Hey, how you doing? I'm excited to talk about this flick, and great intro. You nailed it. You nailed what this flick's about.
Awesome. Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I know you like to keep things close to the vest, but seeing a couple things in here made me think about what you're working on now too. So, you know.
Good. I think you got it then.
Next, I want to introduce a man who is a writer, podcaster, reviewer, incredibly talented. He writes comics for Omen and Revelation Comics, including such things as Michael Nero and Blitz. I'm talking about none other than the multi-talented Steve Shadewing Sellers. How you doing, Steve?
Doing pretty good. I will say that it's rather a challenge to make a movie about two of the most brutal regimes in world history annihilating each other, but they managed to do a pretty good job of it here. So I got to give them that.
Yeah, and I think they do a good job showing that even though there's two brutal regimes, within those regimes, they're not all faceless people. You know, there are actual real people that are involved here that you can care about. You know, so whether Vasily Zaitsev was like that in real life, I have no idea, to be perfectly honest with you, but there it is. And then if there is a yang to my yin at Rain Cross Press, this next man is it. He is a writer, an artist. He is a double threat, and I'm sure he's going to find another skill at some. You know, he did movies as well, so he's a triple threat. I'm talking about the man who does everything. He's doing their character design for my comics, and he knows just a ton of information about movies. This guy is just a font of information. You can call him an encyclopedia of information. I'm talking about none other than Jeff Baracey. He's in the dark there.
That's because I'm undercover.
Oh, he's hiding.
There's snipers out here.
That's pretty good. Actually, was that your hand or what was that?
No, I've got like a little slider over my camera for privacy because, you know, Edward Snowden. I believe it.
Yeah.
That was your hunting, blind. You're up there.
You know, if I'd thought about it, I've actually got a ghillie suit I wish I'd put that on for the review. That would have been perfect.
Actually, what you needed is from that Sherlock Holmes movie. You needed the camouflage to blend right into the chair there. So
Yeah, like, oh, that would have been great if I'd actually taken the time to paint myself to blend in with the background.
Right.
So, all right. So let's get right into this movie. So, Enemy at the Gates. Let me sum it up for you. I summed it up a little bit, but real quick. This movie is about the Battle of Stalingrad, which took place in 1942. For all of you that don't know, the Battle of Stalingrad was a pure meat grinder between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. It went until, I think it's January 1943. So it lasted approximately 6 months. Late 1942 to January 1943, maybe February 1943. It ended with the defeat of the vaunted German army, who had been undefeated at that point. They had rolled through Europe. Most of Germany's best units were thrown into this meat grinder and were just chewed up for a number of different.
I don't know if it's accurate, but at the end of the film, they're reporting, the propaganda is going out, and they said, like, after I believe 183 days of battle, the Germans finally surrendered.
It depends.
That's a long time to fight over one city.
Yeah, and
rubble. They fought over rubble.
Yeah.
And there are a couple lines in the movie that are absolutely true. It became a battle of vanity between Stalin.
Yeah, it became an ego pissing match. Because Stalingrad is named after Stalin, so Stalin's not going to let it go. Hitler wants it for the same reason. So like Lance said, it's rubble, but it's very symbolic, and this could make or break the fighting spirit of either side.
And to be fair, Stalingrad, capturing the Volga River and the Stalingrad was strategically important. There were other places they could have gone, but it allowed you access and control over the very rich oil fields that are in present-day Kazakhstan, which the Soviet Union needed and Germany wanted. Because Germany, whether people realize it or not, didn't have a lot of natural resources.
Well, Germany definitely needed these resources very badly, because that's one of the things that defeats them. If you look at battles like the Battle of the Bulge, where they had to, they ended up abandoning, their tanks, because they created these massive, heavily armored tanks, but the fuel requirements were twice as much as other armored services that other people had. So they very much needed those resources, like you said. They didn't have them in plentiful number themselves, and in trying to go across a vast country like Russia, resupply and refueling was vital.
Yeah, especially for blitzkrieg type warfare, versus what the Soviet Union brought was sheer numbers and just waves of flesh. Very similar to what happened in the Korean War.
Yeah, and we see that in this film, boy.
Yeah. So there are a number of very talented actors and actresses in this film, and I'm going to mention them briefly, and then I'm going to go around for some introductory comments from all of my fellow Crusaders. But we have Jude Law playing Vasily Zaitsev, who was a real life man, who was a sniper in the Soviet Army and a hero of the Soviet Union. He killed 250 plus German soldiers and officers in just this battle alone. And went on to fight with distinction throughout the rest of the war. Then you have a fictional character played by Joseph Fiennes, which is Commissar Danilov. He's a Zampulit, a political officer. But I think they did a very good job writing an accurate political officer and an ambitious political officer. He reminds me a lot of what Perchik might have been from Fiddler on the Roof, to be honest with you. Then you have another fictional character, Rachel Weisz, as Tanya Chernova. Yeah, Tanya Chernova. And she's fictional. Her thing is fine. I think it accurately depicted the role of women in the Soviet Army at this time. In fact, there are a lot of women snipers. Some of the best snipers in the world to this day are Russian women.
I was glad they included that in this.
Yeah.
And we can talk a little bit about her plot line in this movie. Then we had the last person I definitely want to mention. There's two of them. One is Ed Harris as Major Koenig. Doesn't get a ton of screen time, but I think he pulls off the seriousness of this character, who it's debatable whether he exists or not, and we can get into that as well. And then finally, I think the guy who steals the scenes he's in, the scene stealer here, and I'm curious what Lance has to say is this, is Bob Hoskins as Khrushchev.
Nikita Khrushchev
is absolutely a real person. If anything, they kind of softball Khrushchev here because he was a nut. And bloodthirsty as hell, a true devotee of Joseph Stalin. So, we will leave it at that. But we're going to get into all that. So first, I want to go to my fellow Crusaders for some introductions and their opening thoughts on the film. So I'm going to go to Lance first. What did you think?
Well, I mean, I'm glad I picked this because I think it's worth the discussion, and I'm primarily because Jean-Jacques Annaud is like one of my favorite directors. I mean, this dude covers he doesn't have a big catalog, but he can do World War I in Africa. He can do Prehistoric Man. He can do a Stalingrad war movie. He can do The Lover. He can do The Bear. Nature stuff. This guy,
The Bear,
he is just an amazing writer, director, producer. He goes all in when he does these movies, all in practical effects, sets. I mean, he's there to make cinema. So as far as cinema goes, this is an epic one. And of course it happens to be an epic war movie, but for its time, it is top notch. It is absolutely top notch production. This is one worth watching. This is exciting. Everything, the sets, the costumes, everything in this is absolutely top notch in my book.
And I'm going to go out on a limb here and just throw this out there, and I want your reaction to this statement, and then I'll go to Jeff next. I'm not sure if Steve is okay at the moment, but this movie comes out 3 years after Saving Private Ryan, another great war film about World War II. And yet this movie gets none of the acclaim, none of the love, was really downvoted by a lot of critics.
That's
and I'm going to go
surprising.
so far as to say it's because there's no Americans in it, as far as characters.
I just think it's because it's Germany and Russia. I think there's no glamour to it. There's no American romanticism to it. But it's a war movie. Come on, let's be real here.
And I will say the first 20 minutes of Saving Private Ryan shows the brutality of war, and it's incredibly well shot and well done. But I'll say the first 20 minutes of this movie, it's just as good.
It's just as good. And I'm going to say it. I think it was laid out, directed, and photographed much better.
Okay. Hey, I'm not going to argue with you. I'm not going to argue with you on that. In fact, I think that's a fair statement. So I just want to throw that out there and see what you guys thought. So I'm going to go to Jeff next. I'll go to you, Steve, after this. Okay.
Yep. Sure.
So opening thoughts, Jeff, on the movie.
I'll tell you, I have to agree. That's like as soon as I was watching this, I was getting Saving Private Ryan vibes. And surprisingly, even though I was aware of this film, this is one of the many films out there that I just hadn't got around to seeing yet. So I was really happy to see this come up in the queue. Just because already just looking at the caliber of the actors in it, I knew it was going to be solid. Ed Harris does not pick, lazy or bad projects. This guy is a very serious actor. All he wants to do in a story is emote. And so if Ed Harris is dialed into a role, I know he thinks it's going to be a very good production. And on top of that, you've got like Rachel Weisz, Jude Law, and of course Bob Hoskins. Joseph Fiennes, I wouldn't get to know really until like a later step that he appeared in. One of my favorite projects of his was like Fast Forward, where the people were getting those glimpses of the future. That was a really cool setup. But this shows just how good he is, and the cast is stellar. Even the little kid playing Sasha is just nailing it. Mm-hmm. And that's a mark not just of good actors, but good director. A good director is giving these people things to do, and they're working together as collaboration. I know different actors have different styles. Some want to be left alone to do their own thing. Some crave direction. But whatever this guy has to deal with each individual actor, he's getting all of the bang for his buck. And in terms of like Saving Private Ryan, this is every bit as gritty, every bit as dirty. And I was feeling the true horror of war from those opening segments. And Nim, being in the military yourself, you remember those days like when you first get in and they shove you into the cattle cars. to go to your boot camp and stuff. I was having flashbacks of that. Thankfully, I've never been in active combat like that, but I just imagine those scenarios from people I know who have been. And you talk about the chaos and the fog of war, and we see all that in these opening scenes where like people are dying in the mud. And I hate that this film didn't get the recognition because there's no Americana in it. It's a really outstanding film, and I love they did not hold back on showing what like we know how bad the Germans can be, but we understand like here are people in this country, the USSR, and they love their homeland like most people. They just kind of want to do their own thing, but then war comes along and they are impressed into combat. You've got no choice. You got to get out there. And I'd heard these stories before, and to see it on screen was something else. Like, take the rifle. The man with the rifle shoots. The man behind him like holds a little extra ammo. If the man with the rifle dies, you pick up the rifle, then you shoot. And because that's just the lack of military resources they had, and that's what they had to deal with. And like that incredible scene where they're talking about Rachel Weisz's parents getting killed, and they would shoot one person to let the other one drag them into the river just because of the lack of resources, because how thin you're stretched when you're initiating a global scale war. Things get really stretched out. So I love the fact that they got down and dirty with the story, and they told the story of how horrifying war is, as well as giving us the human side of the people who are having to be involved in it all.
Not only that, Vasily Zaitsev really was the Russian or the Soviet Audie Murphy. Even to having a similar background.
Audie Murphy, Sergeant York, John or Carlos Hancock. There's, you don't really when we think of war, we think of, the big lines, the artillery, the guns, and things like that. But snipers are a vital tool in any army. It is amazing how effective and how demoralizing they can be to the enemy. And when you think about how the Germans are overwhelming the defenders of Stalingrad until the point where Vasily gets in there and starts really wrecking house, they're complaining like I've had to promote 25 new officers because he's taken out 25 officers.
Yeah, and he was just a backwoods boy from the Ural Mountains, poaching wolves and stuff.
Yeah, so again, it makes me think of Sergeant York. Like the guy got drafted in the World War I, and what was he like? He was just a backwoods dude who was a good shot, and showed just how doggone effective a guy like that can be out there in the battlefield.
Absolutely. Steve, what about you? Opening thoughts on the film?
Yeah, from what I've seen, it's really a good, solid war movie. I mean, I do like a little bit of the Saving Private Ryan element, but it's a bit darker in a sense because, it's like there's not a clear good or evil demarcation when it comes to the nations fighting. They are both really awful. And you see that actually, in the early scenes with Vasily being pressed into the front lines, and you have people saying, yeah, you go out there or we shoot you. And then, you see people running, when they start getting shelled, and what does the political officer do? He just goes and shoots them, just takes out his pistol, just shoots at the guys running, swimming away.
When the Stukas are dive bombing them on the river, they're shooting people swimming.
Even better is when they set up the machine gun on the line. So if you start to retreat, if you get overwhelmed, it's like no, fight or else. You're going to get shot one way or the other.
And you're hearing the propaganda in the background for all these people reading, off their propaganda papers while they're trying to send everybody else in the front line, and the whole thing is complete chaos. It's like you can't even make out what half the people are saying. That because the idea is to create the sense of what war is, this complete chaotic, bloody mess. And I think it really comes off. And one bit towards the end of that scene that I really liked is after everybody's dead, after the smoke is clear and all of this, you start seeing a couple of things. One is that the statue of Stalin is still standing. Yes. Like they went out of their way to protect that stupid statue. And the second thing is that just in the background, you see part of the building collapse, just like, at that moment. And you can just see, like, this is what they're trying to show you. Like, everything just keeps coming down. But, that statue of Stalin, that's got to stand. So there you go.
Absolutely. Now, we're going to get into some of the actors real quick, and we're going to go through them two at a time. We're going to start off with the two that are headlined on most of the posters, which is Joseph Fiennes and Jude Law. Real quick, I'm going to kick it over to Lance again to start this one off. But for Joseph Fiennes, Jude Law is fantastic as Vasily, and I think he's fantastic in everything he does. I really like Jude Law, but I think Joseph Fiennes in this film brings this subtle menace to being a political officer into everything he does. And there's one moment in particular, and then I'm going to talk about this and then give it over to Lance. For everybody who doesn't know, political officers were in every Soviet Union up until the fall of the Soviet Union. And a political officer had veto power over a commanding officer. They were there to make sure that the authority of the state was always followed in military orders, and they had the authority to execute people or to remove commanders and stuff. And there's a moment where
you see something like this in Hunt for Red October, because what is the first thing that the captain does when he wants to defect? He kills the political officer.
Yeah.
And there's a moment where they're in a basement, and the political officer, Joseph Fiennes, Danilov, looks over and sees some German literature, and with a very subtle menace in his voice, looks at him and goes, "Are you a enthusiast of German literature or something like that?" And the implied threat was there, which is, you may be arrested for crimes for the state.
I really thought they were going to go there with that. Yeah, that's where I thought that subplot was heading.
And so that little bit of acting right there, I thought was fantastic. The menace in his voice, but was very understated. The way he positioned his body and everything, it was really, really good. And I think part of it was probably direction. And that's why I'm going to go to Lance next, because I'm curious what his thoughts on that were. And then also on Jude Law and Joseph Fiennes in the whole movie. So over to you, Lance.
I especially like the follow-up was like, so where'd you learn? She's like, Moscow University. Like, okay, Moscow University. All right.
I think it's that these guys studied their craft. And you got to figure, this is 2001. And these guys were still young. They were up and coming. This is an old movie now.
Yeah.
And they towed the line. So you had two up and coming performers that towed the line. They had it. You had a veteran guy like Ed Harrison there, but these young up and coming actors.
You also had a veteran like Bob Hoskins in there as well. So.
Right. You throw those guys into the supporting cast and you try to let the new guys shine, which they did. They have the charisma, they have the chops, and you got to understand the characters. I mean, to play that kind of fanaticism, as a director, you got to tell your performers, you can't judge the character. You have to play the character. You cannot judge it. The moment you judge that character, you're doing your performance a disservice. So the idea is to play that fanaticism to the hilt. And I think everybody did their part. And there's an interesting scene that's cut between Joseph and Jude Law, actually. Where you see that friendship and fanaticism kind of clash for a second when Vasily talks about shooting wolves, on his farm, and Joseph was like, "Oh, so you owned a gun?" And he was like, "Well, it was just a shotgun or something." He plays it off and he's like, "Well, don't worry, I'm not going to turn you in." You know what I mean? You see that it's like, geez, you guys are at war. And you guys need all the help you can get, and even if the thought crosses your mind, what is wrong with you? I always say it's easier to brainwash somebody than it is to unwash a brain. So I think the performances were just top notch.
Yeah, and Danilov. I mean, the first thing we see of this lunatic. I mean, he really is a lunatic. He is a committed communist, a Bolshevik, up until he's not. And we can get into that maybe in a little bit. But the first introduction we have to him is he's driving like a lunatic in some car through a war zone so he can distribute political propaganda. Just okay. Which really boils down what this war was all about. This battle. It's a battle between fascism and Marxism, communism.
Yeah, right. That was not a move of. Once you get to know the character a little better, at first you think it's a courageous move, but it's not. You understand he is just 100% a party man to the point that he was willing to throw away his life just to try and take out a German officer before he decided, like, "Oh, you're probably a better shot than I am."
Yeah.
Right. And what always gets me too about the propaganda thing is, it's kind of like comic book art of its day. It was flashy, it was colorful, it was designed to get your attention, but also I always have to think about literacy of the time. Like, actually, how many people knew what was on that pamphlet? You know what I mean? The average Joe that's getting turned into hamburger probably can't even read, and yet they go out of their way to create this stuff so that they can try to educate their own people. It's all just a complete contradiction and silliness, but that's humanity.
And meanwhile, the German, the Gestapo on the other side is broadcasting to the Russians saying, "Throw down your arms. Hitler will treat you so much better than your own." And there's an element of truth in it.
Yeah, like your own people are shooting you.
Yeah, but at the same time, you're like, you don't want to be in the arms of Hitler either. So it's like.
So they probably weren't aware of the
shot, or do you want to be thrown into a gas chamber? You're up to you.
I mean, can you imagine, like, you go ahead and give up, and then you've got all these Russian Jews, like Danilov was a Jew himself.
Yeah.
And so, like, where would he have ended up had he surrendered?
Exactly. I mean, the prisoners from the Eastern Front, the Poles and everybody else were treated horribly. I mean, they, as bad as the Jews in many cases. It was just absolutely horrible. So to Steve, what did you think of Jude Law and Joseph Fiennes as Danilov and Zaitsev?
They're both really high quality actors. Fiennes is somebody that, and we talked about previously with Elizabeth, but also he was somebody I knew from Shakespeare in Love and a few other things. That he's somebody that really he definitely brings a lot of charm and a lot of presence to the role. And I will say he tries to act Russian, which is not an easy thing to do. Because a lot of these other actors, I mean, they definitely sound like Brits, trying to be in the roles of Russians. I mean, Jude Law is definitely kind of doing that. That's not what Fiennes is doing. He's definitely somebody that is more trying to play what the role was. And I think that it comes across decently well. And yeah, you see the idealism and the fanaticism and just this, like, yeah, we're both crazy. We're crazy in different ways where, Fiennes is more crazy in I'm an ideological fanatic and I'm willing to throw my my life kind of way. And Jude Law's more in I'm just going to go and shoot all the bastards kind of way. So, and you definitely see the clash in the two approaches because really Law is playing more of an average person who is sort of caught up in the war. And I just love how Danilov plays that to his advantage. Oh yes, this is about class struggle.
Yeah,
we're taking on the sniper over here with his gold rimmed cigarettes, and his fine cigar box.
He's talking about his class struggle, but like you're looking at them as two completely separate classes, and he treats him like that at times. So he's so hypocritical while he's saying this.
Yeah, and smug about
and always
it.
The thing, and always the thing with the class struggle business is that even in communism, it's not consistent because the people at the top, treat the people at the bottom like dirt, and we see that repeatedly in this movie.
Right.
Yeah, I was going to say we do see that in this movie. This movie does a great job showing Khrushchev living in splendor.
I will agree. He is not as insane as we have seen him. There is no "we will bury you" moment that I saw.
Yeah, well. With his shoe, I was waiting for that too. I wanted to shoot bang him on the table.
And it goes so far as to make the point where, like, the Koning, or was it Koning or Kroning? Koning. He's very obviously upper echelon as well, aristocratic.
Oh, yeah.
I love the scene where, like, you see all the soldiers like slam packed into the car, and he's in this very refined boxcar all himself, and he just casually pulls down the shade. Don't look at me, plebes.
Right.
And then I'm just going to light my gold rimmed cigarette.
I think with those two characters in particular, though, Danilov and Zaitsev, they did a great job showing that there are two different ideologies at play here in the Soviet army themselves. Zaitsev he's committed to fighting the Germans, but he's fighting for his country. He's fighting for his people. He's fighting a war against invaders, whereas Danilov is an ideologue. He's fighting for the class struggle. He sees it in those terms. And the average everyday person didn't care about that. And it, I'll go so far as to say it's a lot like what's going on now, when there are people who can turn everything into politics, and the average person doesn't want that.
The average person just wants to be left alone.
Right. Yeah. Ideologies, you can't eat an ideology.
Yeah.
A lot of these people are just people trying to survive, and at that point, like, ideology is not really that important.
Right. And even if you could eat it, it probably wouldn't be tasty.
Exactly.
Unless it was eating a bullet, it definitely
quite
would be
bitter.
Jeff, over to you for Danilov and Zaitsev. So I just love saying that name, Zaitsev. It's cool. So
it is a cool sounding name, no doubt about it. One of the things I liked about the performance in particular is, even with this tremendous gulf between them as far as station in life and ideology, one's a farm boy, one's a highly educated man, one's a party guy, one's just trying to fight for his land and survive. And yet these two, because of their initial interaction, have become great friends, and they really care about each other. But the sad thing about it is that Danilov, even with that, will still, until he kind of redeems himself a little bit at the end, he's still willing to use his friend as a tool for himself and for the ideology and the war effort, when that's not necessary. He's trying to, like, oh, you're building me up, Danilov, you're building me up too much, and you're basically writing a check that my ass can't cash.
Well,
but he's not willing to do that, and we see how Danilov is willing to go so far as to use a child as a pawn as well, to further his ends. And you just know it's going to end well. It's not going to end well, but until things just get to that boiling point where Vasily can no longer deliver in the way he used to, and that's when it really starts to fray. And I love watching the journey of their relationship together from the beginning to the end. It's so well played between these two, and these guys have a great dynamic charisma that goes between that just brotherhood, brotherly friendship that they have. They run up and they'll always hug each other, to where it becomes very antagonistic towards the end of the film. But you can tell, even with all of that, they still care. It's just like, how do I get through to the other guy? So well done.
I think also what's kind of funny is, I remember when we were talking about The Quiet Earth and how we realized that those three people would never be in the same room ever. If it was the end of the world. It's the same situation here. These two guys would never know each other. They wouldn't care to know each other. They wouldn't want to know each other until this experience happened.
Well, I think Jean-Jacques Annaud, is that his last name? Annaud?
Yeah, Annaud.
Annaud does a great job in the writing and directing also of not romanticizing anything, but also not intentionally villainizing anybody. I mean, I feel some sympathy for the commanding German officer when Koenig comes to talk to him, because this man, he's proud. He's probably of Prussian heritage. Most generals at this time were. Mm-hmm. And this great army that he commanded is being chewed up in a slaughterhouse, because of the whims of the Fuhrer, which he can't really criticize. Otherwise, he'll be shot, Now, I say that I have some sympathy for him. Do I really care that he lost? No. In fact, I'm glad he lost. But as a human being, I can feel some empathy for him, so I can kind of put myself and understand what he's going through.
And even Ed Harris, when you find out, he's here specifically not just because he's the best sniper, but because his son died early on in this part of the conflict.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was good. Now, let's get to, I'm going to do two other characters here. I'm going to start with Steve. I'm going to go to Ron. Now, this was a small part. And in real life, this actual person played a much larger role in Vasily Zaitsev, training and working with him. But Ron Perlman is Kulikov. These two, Kulikov and Zaitsev, developed the tactics for Russian snipers that are still in use in the Russian army today. Mm-hmm. They were that instrumental. They're amazing military thinkers and snipers, and it's used by around the world as well. Their tactics and how to set up and everything. So Ron Perlman is in the movie for a small amount of time, but I think he's good. And I want to hear what your thoughts are on him. I also want to talk about Rachel Weisz as Tanya Chernova. Now, there are people who criticize this movie because it brought the love story element into it. I can see what they're saying. I don't think the movie needed it per se, but there's a humanizing element. And also, I think it allows us to see that Danilov, even though he's a political ideologue, is a typical apparatchik in Russia, where he's going to use the party for his own enrichment, his own power, and to try and get the girl. And when he can't get the girl, he is petty and spiteful about it.
Yes.
So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve. What did you think about Rachel Weisz's performance and Ron Perlman's performance?
Ron Perlman, in the time that he gets, I thought that he was quite solid. He's an actor that I generally like seeing. And a lot of it is just because he has got that big bear performance, and he's very formidable. You know, he's physically imposing, and that gives him a lot of screen presence.
If I can,
and we definitely see that. Yeah.
If you ever want to see Ron, the first time I saw Ron Perlman in a movie,
Quest for Fire,
an '80s movie. No, The Name of the Rose, starring Sean Connery.
Oh yeah, that's a great.
You know, that's also Jean-Jacques Annaud. He directed that.
Is it? I love that.
Okay.
Quest for Fire. So there's the link. You know,
hate the book, love the movie. So anyway, sorry to interrupt you, Steve. Keep going.
Yeah. So because of that, you really get a lot of that presence from Perlman, and so we see that, and you really need somebody imposing to go opposite Jude Law, because Jude Law is a really charismatic actor in just about everything he does, and you know, he definitely sparkles in things that we've seen him in before, Gattaca and everything else that he's been in. So to see, you know, somebody who is a very rough-hewn sort of character opposite Jude Law, I think it works really, really well opposite. And in the time that we see, it really kind of works. Character-wise, I think it also works because we had just seen, like, when he first shows up, we had just seen Vasily ultimately get kind of screwed over because he was set into a trap by Koenig. And at that time, he just was thrown in a trap of like, oh, yeah, we're just going to tell you now that we have a sniper after you and that he knows all about you because we told him everything. And so, Kulikov is it kind of shows in, you know, to sort of counterbalance him, because this is somebody who's familiar with sniper tactics. This was somebody who was more familiar with Koenig personally. And I think that kind of also made a necessary balance. So I've kind of felt that worked. Rachel Weisz is an actress that I've liked in a number of things. I'll always think of her in The Mummy mainly.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
You know, so and it's kind of hard to disassociate that here. But I mean, I think she's in the role well enough. And I think what's kind of important is that she kind of shows the role that female snipers had in the Russian army. There are definitely a number of stories about, you know, women that have been in the Russian army that had fighting roles. And actually, like, if you really kind of want to see some really interesting takes on them, Garth Ennis's war comics, particularly Sarah, shows an example of, you know, what the Russian women were doing, and what we see kind of Rachel Weisz's character very consistent with that. But at the same time, she's kind of used in a way as a tug of war object, because Danilov is kind of using her, and it's very clear that he's trying to get with her, you know, and that's why he's reassigning her. But I can't help but think that she's kind of resentful of this, because she wants to fight, she wants to be in the front lines. You know, these people that are counting on her, that she cares about, are under constant threat. She doesn't want to be, you know, back there with headquarters, and she's kind of forced to do this. But at the same time, she can't openly criticize any of this because she knows she'll get shot. So I think that the underlying tension is handled very well by Weisz in an understated way in the performance and in the way we see her play the role. So yeah, I like both of them.
I will say that one of the things that impressed me as well, you were mentioning Jude Law's performances, is anybody who can emerge playing Watson from the dominating shadow of Robert Downey Jr.'s Sherlock Holmes is deserving of some attention, because at that time when that movie was shot, Robert Downey Jr. could just walk on a film and dominate it just because of the cool personality, you know. And
Fun fact, Robert Downey Jr. used to call Jude Law Hodgson on the set of Sherlock Holmes.
Doesn't surprise me. And Robert Downey Jr. It's amazing to me that people think that Robert Downey Jr.'s filmography starts with like Iron Man. I'm like, go all the way back to the 80s. You know,
Yeah,
Yeah.
way
Have you
back.
ever seen Less Than Zero?
Zero, yeah.
Or like going way back to my favorites when he's shoot, what's the one with Rodney Dangerfield going back to college?
Back to school.
Back to School.
Back to School, yeah.
Yeah,
Soap Dish is another one that's funny as hell.
where he plays his brother's best friend in that.
Weird Science.
You ever seen anybody heckle a diver?
Yeah. Yeah. So great actor. For those types, for all types of movies, but those types of movies, especially when you're a kid, loved them.
Yeah, it's just kind of around that point, he was kind of like settling into the Tony Stark persona because that was what he was really known for, and almost he did a little bit of that in Sherlock Holmes as well. But of course, this is not a show about Robert Downey, so I guess
Yeah.
Over to you, Jeff. Let's talk about Ron Perlman as Kulikov and Rachel Weisz, however you pronounce it, as Tanya Chernova. So
yeah, I'll be brief on Ron Perlman because he is Ron Perlman, and the thing I've always admired most about him is no matter what level of the production, because I've seen him in a F-ton of really crappy films, because every film you do is not like a $5, $10, $20 million contract. So a lot of times you got to do some crap to do the stuff you want to do, or to keep your house in order, that sort of thing. But there are certain actors that I really respect, like him, like Samuel L. Jackson, like Thomas Jane, and it doesn't matter what sort of film I see them in, they're never just phoning it in. They go ahead and they do the work. And I have incredible amount of respect for somebody who's like, okay, I am taking this role. It's a shit movie, and I'm still going to play it to my utmost. I'm going to give you a really good performance. Maybe not my Oscar-winning performance, but you're still going to get a good performance. So Ron Perlman's just good in everything. He could play a poop emoji, and I'd watch it. That's how good he is.
And
he just gives you that.
He's Hellboy at this time. So this is around Hellboy.
Yeah, he's Hellboy at this time. Yep.
Yeah.
So, Ron Perlman's Ron Perlman, and it's kind of funny you mentioned that because so much of his career has been played under different sorts of prosthetics and makeup, and in Hellboy, full flipping costume. And here he's got to wear these teeth because he has, like this movie doesn't shy away from how awful the Soviet Union is. It's like, yeah, I'm part of the thing, but they smashed out my teeth because they didn't believe me. Now I've got to wear these ridiculous, metal dentures to eat solid food. So he's great. He's always fun. He's always engaging to watch. He's always just magnetic and charismatic. And when you look like a throwback to the Neanderthals, I guess you kind of got to be.
Yeah.
That's how you get there.
And he was one.
And he was one. Quest for Fire.
He really does look like Cro-Magnon Man, I swear.
He was cast for one of those reasons.
We have this. I remember watching Beauty and the Beast was the first time he really hit my radar, and then finding out, like watching Quest for Fire, and like going like, oh, and then seeing him in things like Chronos, like oh, and,
Ice Pirates.
I didn't recognize him in Ice Pirates initially. Yeah, he wasn't quite on my radar yet, but just the fact that you see him in that, and my wife's mom actually made this comment because everybody was watching Beauty and the Beast, like, I've never seen a fellow before who looks better with makeup than without. And that's Ron Perlman, He's definitely got like that old school gene like popped up out of him somewhere. But as for Rachel Weisz, now this is a character I find really interesting because I bought into the romance. For one thing, Danilov wants it, and he's maneuvering, and it becomes kind of like in some ways the intellectual versus the jock, even though Vasily is not trying to be the jock, he just is the jock. And then there's that, well, why does that guy always get the girl? Like, look at me, I'm smart, I'm educated, I have status and position. But but this guy's attractive because he's the hero, and I've made him the hero. And you can see that she's into that, but she didn't even notice him like Lance says, like these people would never get together on the train car out. Like those two are not going to ever make a connection. But then you put them into the pressure cooker of the battlefield. And, you know, when you're in high stress situations and you put men and women together, men and women will seek each other out for comfort. They will seek each other out for emotional support and stability. They will seek each other out for pleasure. It just always happens if you have men and women together on the battlefield. It's just going to happen.
That works, isn't it?
There's nothing you can do about it. I remember I had friends who were out there in Iraq, and they were talking about how the CEOs were getting pissed off because, you know, you weren't supposed to fraternize because you're in a Muslim country.
Right.
And if you got caught doing that, it could cause big trouble. You know, like, oh, well, you can't use our land anymore. Like, move your base. You know, like you're sinning against Allah. But you know, people would still hop on a Jeep and ride a mile or two out in the desert to get their business going because, you know, like, oh, I can't get caught out here. You know, if the CO catches us, we're getting the Article 15 or something. So, like, we'll just cruise off onto these sand dunes and do our thing. So that's just going to happen. In high stress, high pressure situations makes people more inclined to get together. So I bought that whole relationship because, you know, Vasily makes this great point. As you're watching the men and the women party and dance and smoke and drink. And there's even one lady putting on makeup as he's explaining it to her. And like, why is she putting on makeup? Who's she looking pretty for? Well, the guys who are there, because this might be their last night. This might be her last chance to enjoy human contact of that sort. So why not? And so when and, you know, I've been in situations where you have like a crowd of soldiers, you know, all bunking together, and you wake up and you hear somebody doing it nearby, and you just like, oh, well, you know, good for you, and you ignore it. You go back to sleep because that's all you've got. And so again, I appreciate the film for putting that level of realism into things. And so I buy into that, and I understand why Rachel Weisz's character wants to fight. There are other women who are fighting, so why can't I? And now my parents have been murdered. Now I really want to fight. But at the same time, Vasily and Danilov are right that because of her education, her skills, you've got to also look at her as a different sort of asset. Yes, she can fight, she can shoot. But the code breaking and the translation is arguably a more valuable role to play. And I get her resistance to it, and I like how they played that out. And Danilov eventually he knows he can't win this argument with her. Like, she's going to find a way regardless, because he's not going to have her shot. He loves her, you know. Yep. But I did like that whole thing. And for me, the love angle and the love triangle all actually worked out. And I think it does show an aspect of the story that it's not one of these forced romances that you get in a lot of action films. Like, I was so glad, like, I remember Roger Ebert talking about him and Gene Siskel talking about The Road Warrior. And, you know, there was a lack of love story in there. It's like, oh, it's hard to have a love story at 180 miles an hour when people are shooting at you. And that is perfectly logical. But here is a story where you can have, you know, a dark, gritty, bloody, you know, awful scenario, and people are still going to find a way to come together. And it works. It fits.
I think it's, you know, it depends on what kind of movie you want to make, too. I mean, we've gone strictly historical, almost like a docudrama type thing, then it might not have fit. But this was a historical drama. It was a, you know,
it was a historical drama, and we did have real people in there, and, you know, real people have real people emotions and do real people things. So for me, it all worked out.
Cool. Lance, what about you for these two actors? So.
Well, I mean, once again, you know, Rachel Weisz was coming up, just like Jude Law and Joseph Fiennes. I mean, it was one of those things where she was making her mark, and she has the charisma. And what I just liked the most is how unglamorously it was played. If this was, you know, Americanized, yeah, and anyway, if it was Americanized in any way, her hair wouldn't have been as radish.
Yes, perfect hair and makeup.
You know, so I liked how it was played unglamorously. And as far as on the flip side of that, Ron Perlman plays it more as a sophisticate, even though, you know, he was briefly trained in Germany as a sniper, and obviously he's educated and knows several languages. He has a little bit more of that British accent to make him a little bit more smug, even though he doesn't look it. So he plays it as a sophisticate, and I like the way that was played. We'll never know how it really was, but him taking the reins on the performance and doing that, I think that's what sold me the most. You know, he played it off very, very, very well. So, I mean, as far as the cast goes in general, it was top notch. It all worked out.
Now, we're running out of time, and I want to get to the direction and cinematography in this film. So I'm going to talk about two other actors real quick. If anybody wants to add some stuff in after I do that, that's fine, and then we'll go to the other stuff. But I can't go without mentioning Ed Harris as Major Koenig. A smaller part, there's not a ton of speaking lines in it for him, but he brings the gravitas to it, the seriousness and the professionalism that Ed Harris always does. He is excellent in this role, and you can believe that he is a Prussian noble in this point, even though he doesn't bring a Prussian accent to it or everything. The way his bearing, the way he carries himself, the way he hunts, even the little things.
Nobody else is bringing an accent, so why should he?
Yeah, and the little things they did when he goes out to hunt. He's got the cape over one shoulder and everything. You know, it's like he is the Russian nobleman who happens to be, or Prussian nobleman who happens to be in a war. I think he's excellent in that role. The other guy I have to mention is a guy that I have a lot of respect for because he's so versatile. Bob Hoskins as Nikita Khrushchev. He nailed this part. To me, he is the scene stealer of the movie. And for all of you who are not familiar with him, I'm going to point you to two other places. He is the detective in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Bob Hoskins, and he's also Smee in Hook.
Mm-hmm.
That's how versatile this guy is among the many other roles he has done.
He was Mario in the Super Mario Brothers movie.
Yeah.
Well,
I was gonna say, did you have to bring that one up?
Yeah. Bob Hoskins.
But I mean, it shows you how different he is from Nikita Khrushchev. I mean, I was looking at that. I'm like, was that Bob Hoskins? Yeah, it turned out it was Bob Hoskins, and that was really
one of my favorite villain pieces by him is actually him in War with Jet Li. He is a completely despicable person in that film.
So Bob Hoskins is another one of these people. I mean, we're talking about if you were asking for two professional actors to support these young up-and-comers, I don't think you could have done much better than these two.
Absolutely.
They are just actors.
No, wait, it wasn't War.
Yeah. But his performance as Khrushchev is fantastic.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really got to give it to him. So now I am going to go because unfortunately I'm up against a little bit.
Unleashed. Sorry for you out there. Unleashed. If you want to see a really brutal Jet Li action film with a horrible Bob Hoskins character, watch Unleashed.
I'm up against a little bit of a hard time limit, so I want to make sure that we got to cinematography here and direction. And I apologize to Jeff. I'm going to go back to Lance first, and then I will come to you on
sure.
Lance, I think this movie is beautifully shot. I think the effects are amazing, practical effects throughout. The cinematography, I think, really gives you that grimness that you were looking for, especially the opening shots on the Volga River were fantastic. And I want to hear from a technical perspective what you thought of everything, of how this film is done as well.
Oh, to me, looking at it and even the making of I don't even know how they did it. It's a logistic nightmare. Just building that set and blowing it up over and over again. The stunt coordination, the extras, the costumes. This is no CGI fest.
Correct me if I'm wrong. You have talked about what a nightmare filming on water is before when we were doing Elizabeth, and yet they're doing a war movie here during the day on water. So.
It's. I mean, that's how you have to film it. You got to figure it out, and that's one of the strong points of Jean-Jacques Annaud. The guy has it together. And all these movies he makes, whether it's a World War I in Africa or shooting all over the world with prehistoric men, the guy has it together. He has his logistics together. And that's the guy I would just love to talk to say, how the hell did you do it? Who is your team? How did you mastermind this? Who else was masterminding it? Because this was not an easy film to shoot. And I like that it just has its film stock. They didn't try to do anything silly like a dry bleach process. They didn't try to wash it out. They didn't try to do that film. This is something I'm going to say that's really weird. Film historical fake look. like they did with Saving Private Ryan, which annoyed me. I'm like, no, it's warm. You can see the reds and the rouges. You can see the colors and the uniforms. Don't wash it out. And I think if they would have done that with this film, it would have ruined it, because you need to see the distinction of the uniforms, the characters.
Now, I wanted to bring this up to you. The shot of the crossing of the Volga River, I saw this and I wanted to get your reaction to this, was shot on the Altaberner Sea, a man-made lake near the village of Pritzen in the south of Brandenburg during a deliberate foggy time so they could get the right look and feel.
Nice.
Right. Movie magic. It's not in a studio. It's not CGI. It's not green screen. This is how you have to do it. And every bit of that budget plays out on the screen professionally. That's the way you do it. You don't shoot it on video and try and make it look like film, and it ends up looking like a Saturday morning kids show or a soap opera for a period piece that's this epic. So granted, it's 2001. The video invasion really hit about probably 5-6 years later, but I don't think Jean-Jacques Annaud would have went that route. I think he still would have kept it the way it needed to look. And this film is eye candy to me. It's absolute eye candy. And to see how it was just put together, it marvels me. I'm like, okay, these are pros, 100% professionals that will be going away soon. And it's up to us to pick up that torch and do like. Otherwise, we're in trouble cinematically. So this is a movie to study.
I will also say that even for 2001, this movie was relatively inexpensive. It was $68 million. I mean, it's a good budget.
That's surprising.
Huge. It made its money back. Probably lost some money after advertising and everything, which is unfortunate. But yeah, I mean, you look at it, and for $68 million, it looks a hell of a lot better than it should, because it's
and that's just called professionalism. It's called hey, you use what resources you have, and every bit of it is within the frame of what you're shooting. It doesn't matter what's happening on the outside. If things are being held up by chicken wire or paper or whatever, it's all that matters is what's in front of that camera. And you're going to be gold if you pay attention to that. You don't worry about the glamour. You don't worry about what kind of coffee is being served. You just make the movie. And this is a perfect example of how to do it with a subject matter that isn't really commercial or popular, but it still plays out as top notch.
I'll tell you, finding out that budget impresses me more than ever after having watched that film, because that looked like an easily, for the time, $100 million film.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Not only that, there were big names throughout the whole production. I'm going to go to Jeff next. James Horner did the soundtrack for this movie.
Yep.
And he was not cheap either. And the soundtrack is fantastic as well. We don't have enough time to devote to everything, but the soundtrack is great. So what we're saying is go watch this film. So I'm going to go over to Jeff. Thoughts about the cinematography and the direction of the film and the effects.
I don't think I'm going to say anything that's going to be better than what Lance said, although I will say, just for nostalgia's sake, I kind of enjoy the fact that nobody's trying to do the accents in this movie, because that harkens back to the days of World War II movies that I grew up with, where all the Germans were always played by British guys. Yeah. And so that's like some nostalgia for me right there. Like all these modern actors in this modern thing, you think people would be trying to speak like this, comrade, nobody's doing anything like that.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't this the era of Hollywood where there were just a ton of British villains too? It was like revolutionary.
No, there's always good British villains. I mean, like they're just so good at it. But as far as the cinematography and all that goes, like Lance has hit on all the most crucial stuff. Obviously, the man put out the work. He looked at his settings. He planned extraordinarily well. He knew exactly what he wanted for each particular shot, each particular sequence, each setup, and so it just flows. And Lance will tell you how much planning goes into all of that. One of the things that I like, and I understand that Lance also doesn't like about video, is sometimes you get to a setting and you get ideas and you just shoot on the fly. You haven't created these things, but that can also be to your detriment, because then you get 100 different takes that you didn't need. It becomes ridiculous because you can just like a quick reset, we'll do that sort of thing. But the meticulous nature of this is precisely what this project required. And as for the direction, it's so spot on. The story is told so well, and there's no fat on this. There is, it's nothing but the meat on the bone. This is a nice, lean piece of meat. It's perfectly structured. It's perfectly well done. Aside for the people who think the love story was extraneous, I disagree. I don't think there's anything extraneous in this film. I think this film is just completely perfect as is.
Awesome. Steve, what about you? Thoughts on film, cinematography, direction?
Yeah, I think you guys have covered it pretty well. I will say that I really like how practical it looks. I like that they, when they actually do shooting, it looks realistic without them digitizing everything. This was obviously in the days before they really started CGIing everything left and right.
Oh god, CGI blood is the worst.
They're using actual
it's the worst.
blanks, and they're actually using squib blasts on people.
And you're seeing like actual fog, in some of the scenes in the building. I thought that was really good. The lighting is appropriate. It's dark without being pitch black. You just see enough of the colors washed out to give it the flavor that it needs. I think a lot of it is the way it's laid out as well. I think Lance was right when he made that point earlier, that a lot of it is the framing of the shot. A lot of it is the way that it's presented on the screen, and everything really works. And just knowing what to do with the actors that you have, knowing when to take advantage of their presence and their charisma, which this movie does. Putting him in the shot in just the right way. Yeah, I will say that it definitely has that French auteur look. We are talking about a French auteur, so
that's the way to say it. I mean, he's an auteur all the way.
So let's go to closing thoughts, and I'm going to start off here first. I'm going to say that a couple things for my closing thoughts, and then we're going to go around the horn. I'm going to go to Jeff first, and we'll go backwards. My closing thoughts on the movie got hated on and torpedoed by all the right people. Roger Ebert, Peter Rainier, and Peter Travers torpedoed this movie in the United States for a variety of reasons. The ideologues left in the Soviet Union hated this movie, who fought in Stalingrad hated it because they didn't like the way the Soviet army was portrayed. The people in Germany, the elites of Germany, hated it because they thought it brutalized war and showed that that it glorified war, which I think is ridiculous. It's not glorifying war at all. And I think that all the right people hated it for all the right reasons. Which is to say, don't let box office tell you what to watch. This movie didn't get away, but a lot of times box office is driven by people with agendas. Go watch movies for yourself, and you will find those gems that often pop up 10, 20, 30 years later, and you're going, how did this movie not make its money back? Well, it's because someone with an agenda who was properly placed decided to torpedo it. And there are times when I've agreed with Roger Ebert, but 99% of the time I don't. The man loves to torpedo films. He did it to films as varied as this one, and he tried to do it to Ferris Bueller's Day Off. The man really tried to torpedo that movie. He hated it. So let other people. I'm just going to get off my soapbox a moment, but I want to say this to everybody for old film, modern film. Let other people tell you what to think about movies. Take it under advisement, but go find out for yourself. You owe it to yourself, So that is my little bit. I'm going to go to Jeff next. So
I'm going to echo this. I used to really enjoy, when I was in my teens, watching Siskel and Ebert. They exposed me to a lot of films that I probably wouldn't have seen otherwise, because I grew up in a small town with one theater, just two theaters in the theater. We didn't get a lot of this broad expanse of films. Not like we didn't have cable at the time either, so I wasn't exposed to a lot of things. So this was a way for me to get some exposure to the films and go okay, I would like to see that one day. And I started through them to learn about what people look for in a film, what to be critical about. But as I got older, I realized that I disagreed with them a lot once I would see some of these films they were talking about, because it's like you said, for whatever reason, the guy likes to torpedo films. And then like years later, when they become, these cult phenomenons, or they make a huge box office, well, he's got to turn around. It's like, well, on reassessing the film, it's like, well, no, that's bullshit. Stand by what you say or not.
Right.
You can look at a film 10 years later and you go like, you know what? I missed the point when I saw it way back then. I'm looking at it with fresher, older, wiser eyes. I can appreciate that. But when you just flip flop upon saying anything, and in the modern day, I used to enjoy things like Rotten Tomatoes, but Rotten Tomatoes has become nothing but a shill factory. Um Even though arguably we we're getting to the point where we can add our own reviews to there. But I've watched the politics of things change, and so my own assessment of how I do things now is I watch a trailer or a teaser if I can, and that's all. And if the teaser nails me, then I want to go see the film. Or if I get interested enough to see what other people do, I will watch people on YouTube, the common man, not somebody who went to school, film school, just to become a reviewer. I want to see what people think about a film, and that might sway me one way or the other. And I know there's a lot of consternation about that these days. It's like, oh, people are just review bombing or love bombing films. But there's a lot of people who are like us, who are just folks who have enjoyed film. Not everybody is a filmmaker like Lance, but who have watched enough film and really pay attention to film to the point where we have gotten to know film in a way that's as valid as any education out there in it. And so, in echoing your point, really just like what you want to like, watch what you want to watch. If something sways you to go watch a film, that's great. And if the film turns out to be good and you like it, that's even better. But if something sways you not to see a film, and then later on you do watch it, like, oh, they were off their nut, that's cool too.
Yeah,
everybody's cool with liking what they want to like, watching what they want to like. There are some really bad films that I love, and I agree with the fact that they are bad films, but I still love them. And there are films that are like so Oscar worthy, and I can acknowledge that they're really great films, but I just don't like them. So it's not just about the art; it's about personal taste. So you do you.
Yeah, I mean, we're reviewers here, and obviously we're reviewing movies, but we're four different people. I mean, we don't always agree on every movie either.
Yep.
So things are subjective as well. I mean, we can have our opinions, and we certainly do, and we hope that those opinions help you one way or the other. But at the end of the day, it's whatever your personal preference is as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, Steve, over to you. Final thoughts.
Yeah. On top of that, I would just say, develop your own sensibilities. I mean, you know what kind of appeals to you. You know the kinds of things that you enjoy. Maybe that will develop over time as you understand how things work. Based on the things that you've seen. Maybe anything that you've studied. I kind of come a little bit from both worlds. I know I looked at reviewing films very differently before I actually kind of got into graduate school and started learning things. But at the same time, I think it's still important to kind of keep those kinds of viewpoints in perspective, because it's sometimes easy to kind of lose sight of just what is just generally enjoyable, and you don't necessarily need to think about every little artistic element in it. But if that's the kind of thing you like, and I do, I enjoy seeing how things work artistically in a film as well. Absolutely enjoy those. But you have to look and see what works for you, and kind of develop basically what your own tastes are, what appeals to you, and what you value in a film, and see whether or not those things do it. And if you find people that generally align with yours and you like what they say, fine. At the same time, I wouldn't say that anybody is going to be, you're not going to agree with every single person out there or every single person's opinions. You kind of have, this is why it's important. You have to find your own and find your own path to finding
I would just say,
what you want to see in a film.
Yeah, I would say, just like in this movie, beware the ideologues. There are going to be people who like stuff and don't like stuff. Beware people who torpedo stuff for ideology.
I mean, I like Manos the Hands of Fate, and it's horrible. So
Yes.
I'm not always the academic type of person.
You will never catch me talking up modern Star Wars stuff, but I'm not doing it because of ideology, and that's all I'm going to say. So, Lance, over to you.
Well, I think the whole idea is that we are here to say, hey, look, check this out.
Yeah.
May not be up your alley, but check it out because it has merit. So that's why we are here. This is why I suggested a film as such, because it also just spiders out into other things, other thing that the actors do, the directors do, it doesn't matter who's involved in the film. So that's why we are here. And, not to beat a dead horse, but when you look at reviewing, especially like a Siskel and Ebert, I grew up in their era, and I would watch sneak preview and at the movies just to see the clips, because sometimes I had already seen the movie, and then I'd be like, you idiots don't know what you're talking about. What's your problem?
Exactly.
Going back 40 years, I'm like, that's not right. I watched that movie, and I think you missed the mark on it. But what's the next clip? Now I get exposed to see what's happening, what movies are coming out. So that was the benefit to me. Now what we look at, the review aspect, is that anybody can have an opinion. I mean, just look at the Internet Movie Database. Soon enough, the greatest classic's going to be rated 5 or 3, 4, 2 stars because people just don't get it. And that's sad. Or it's going to be a show 10, like they were all lying about The Mandalorian. Who did you work for? Disney? It's like, so I think in a sense, those kind of ratings just get rid of. It's about the articulation of how we can explain why we think this movie should be seen. And I think that's important because a lot of people just don't have it. And I think that doesn't necessarily say we're more experienced. It doesn't necessarily say we know more. But what it is what we're saying is look a little harder. Try to see the merit in it. I mean, obviously, Siskel and Ebert hated Caveman, and I loved it. I thought that was Ringo Starr's best performance.
Oh, that's a great film.
Yeah, I was like,
freaking hilarious.
Yeah, to invent a whole stupid language for that film and then have the sheet and go to the movie theater and translate it was rather educational. That got you involved in the movie, like smell-o-vision. You know what I mean? So
William Castle.
Yeah. So the whole idea is look, it's a good flick, man. This war movies may not be your thing, but the point is it's epic and it's relevant, and it was made about an unpopular subject. Therefore, I can see why it torpedoed. But it takes brave people to create this cinema.
Yeah.
And by creating this cinema, I would stand behind it 100%. Because I know what it's going to be like to cover something unpopular, and you're just waiting on the firing line. But I say, so be it. Let the art dictate. Let the art dictate.
Absolutely. All right. I am up against that wall, so we are going to get out of here. I want to remind everybody we are doing 7 degrees of Cinema Crusaders. We may even get to a Kevin Bacon movie at some point. I don't know.
You never know.
You never know. So whose turn is it? Whose turn is it to pick?
Steve is up, so he can choose from Bob Hoskins, Rachel Weisz,
Jude
Law,
Ed Harris.
Yeah, you've got quite a selection with this film to choose from.
So we will let you know what is coming up, but we are going to get out of here real quick. So on behalf of myself and my fellow Cinema Crusaders, thank you everybody for tuning into this podcast. Remember, keep that popcorn warm, that comfy chair comfy, and watch a movie this weekend. Maybe even watch this movie this weekend. But until next time, we're the Cinema Crusaders, and we are out of here, everybody. Bye.
See ya.